I was wrong to expect cleaners to be honest and hardworking. I was also wrong to expect guests to act reasonably. Have you realized yet that it's not all sunshine and 5-star reviews? That means you're in the right place. Today, we're helping a soldier invest into this market with the right guidance so that he can make a precision strike on the success of the Airbnb market in the Poconos. Is this game as easy as he thinks? Stick around to the end, and you'll see. That's because this is the community where we talk about the gross, awkward, and the operational messes, as well as the real strategies that help you keep going instead of quitting. Because this industry is somewhere where you can win big, or you can ignore education and you can quit. Welcome to Short-Term Rental Problems and Solutions. Let's get right into today's email. Hey, Jeremy. I got a question for you. My girlfriend and I are both in the military, so we're always moving around. A few years ago, we bought a house near Fort Liberty in North Carolina, and now we've got it rented out. We are refinancing it so that we can use the equity for another investment. We've been looking at the Poconos because I've stayed there a bunch over the years, and honestly, I don't really get why some of these Airbnbs do so well. Most of the places I've stayed in looked like they hadn't been updated since the 80s. Wood paneling, old furniture, plaid couches, the whole deal. A buddy of mine bought one up there not long ago, painted everything white, filled it with Wayfair furniture, and now he's acting like he's cracked the code. Part of me wants to buy just to prove he's no genius. My girlfriend has a great eye for decorating, so I feel like we can pull it off too. Am I underestimating this? Or is getting a successful Airbnb in the Poconos really that straightforward? I'm almost ready to pull the trigger. Thanks, Jason. Well, Jason, I love the confidence. You're not wrong. It's definitely achievable. But just like in combat, you should not underestimate your mission here. Success in short-term rentals requires a team effort. If you've achieved any rank in the military, you know how to deal with an imperfect team. Sometimes a team that cannot be trained. So the first thing to understand about this market specifically is that there are a few good contractors. So once you find one, find a way to be their favorite customer. Don't show them that you're disappointed. Your attention to detail, set the bar high, have high expectations. It might backfire in this situation. Your idea of the right way to do it might be different than theirs. And remember, this isn't the Army. There's no basic training for contractors. A college kid gets a summer job because he can paint walls. Then he drops out of college because he's making more money painting than he ever will with his philosophy degree. He then gets fired from his painting job because he didn't show up on 420. So now he's an independent contractor and he's responding to your posts on Facebook. Jason, these are the kind of folks that are doing work in the Poconos. It's the guys who haven't escaped. They're still living with their parents. They're still in this area. And a big part of the reason that they're here is because of cheap housing. It's because of, this is where they've built up some business, and it would be a shame to just drop it all and go somewhere else. I was a math teacher at the local high school for 10 years, and almost every single one of my students was ashamed of this region. They all would say, when I get out of college, when I go out of high school, I'm moving back to New York. I'm moving back to the city. And they were like, they were embarrassed to be in the Poconos. There was this aura, there was this persona that if you live in the Poconos, you're not as good as you would be if you were out there where all the other young people are, where all the other girls are, where all the other eligible bachelors are. And truth be told, there's very few young people in the Poconos. They're either children of people who are living in the Poconos, but once they reach college age, they generally move away if they have some promise. So we're stuck with a shallow labor pool. Maybe the best word is shallow pool of talent. So what you do find is a few folks who are like that, rustic kind of redneck type that are really proud of their mutters and their 4-wheel drive, but they're generally out there in the woods. And some of them are contractors and they will work with you. But whatever experience you have with military people or with contractors, you've got to kind of discount that a little bit because we're in a small little fishbowl. We're in a small little pond over here, and there's not that many frogs. Or maybe there are a lot of frogs and there's not that many eagles. I don't know the right analogy to use there, but I want to make sure that you get that impression, that point. This area, success in short-term rentals is a team effort. You win or you lose as a squad. And your rental success is going to depend on your ability to recruit, build up, and have a team that you can count on. If you don't have that, you should probably not invest here. Or if you're not willing to get that, like, I don't want to say don't invest. It's just that you have to go in with your eyes wide open, right? You need to plan your battle before you engage. You need to know that the people on your side, they have your back, right? And so coming from that kind of military background, it's easy to think that other people have self-control and discipline and a work ethic or some ambition. And what you find in the Poconos is people who are they're just contractors because they got fired from their construction job. And it was easy enough for them to start a company. And you don't always find good talent. You don't always find people who know what they're doing. You don't always find people with training. You don't always find people who know building codes, even. So finding one of those folks is a bit of a challenge. And if any of my listeners want to hear more about that specifically, I'd be happy to record an episode just on how to find a good contractor in this region. But there's a bunch of other things for me to go over today. So the point of it is that there are some crappy contractors out here. So the way that you protect yourself is to have a project manager. Now, this project manager could be literally anybody. It's best if it's somebody with some experience with building codes, with some experience with a township and things like that. You need accountability. So for your contractors, you should have somebody watching over them. The other thing I highly recommend is have multiple contractors. Don't just hire one painter who's going to do everything. Have multiple people stopping there on a regular basis to check on the job and see how it's going and make some progress. So your landscaper can keep an eye on your painter can keep an eye on your carpenter, and your carpenter can keep an eye on your decorator. Like, all these people, they kind of want to tell you about all the issues that they're seeing in the other one. Try not to get too wrapped up in that drama, but them knowing that there's another person there or that can show up is going to cause them to act more accountably. And you're going to get better performance out of them. The next thing to know about this region is that there are very few good cleaners. In my opinion, there's a lot of cleaners. There's a ton of them. And the number that are good, just not huge. Don't make them think that you aren't thrilled with their services. Once you find a cleaner, you want them to think that you absolutely love them and you couldn't do business without them. This balance of power is important, because if they feel like they could get fired, they're not bending over backwards for you. They're not pulling an all-nighter in order to get your house ready for the next guest. You want to make sure that you're their best friend as well. So that's kind of the way the dynamic works with the cleaners in the Poconos, is scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, that kind of thing. Offer ways to increase the cleaning fee, offer them additional opportunities and services, and make sure that they know that you are their best friend, that you are their best client. But you can't just say that directly. You can't just say, hey, I'm your best client. I don't know why I'm still talking about this. I think you get it. You just want to make sure that these cleaners, even if they fail you, that they don't know that they failed you. They should know that your priority is your guest, that sometimes the guests are unhappy, and that's just because the guests have their own issues, right? So that's, I think, important to know, as well as don't assume that your cleaners are replaceable, because in the middle of the busy season, it is impossible to find a cleaner who's better than the one you have. And it's also sometimes impossible to find a new cleaner with standards that are as high as yours, but with a budget that's as low as the last one. So if your clean with your current cleaner's $200 a clean, and your cleaner is slacking, or they're not showing up, or they can't do your house next week for you to accept a reservation, then you're going to be tempted to go find another cleaner, right? Well, if somebody's willing to do it for 180 or for 160 or 140, their standards are lower than the other one. So I'm not going to say this is aligned completely, but if you were to graph the quality of the clean this way, and you were to graph the price that they're charging this way for the same house, what you're going to find is a strong correlation between those two. So your approach as an owner of a property is going to be, I want something reasonable that's at a high level for my guests. And then I need to hold my cleaners accountable. So accountable to standards, to a checklist, and systems that ensure that quality continues. That's what's important with your cleaners. So the next thing to understand is what happens when you screw over your cleaner. So if you do make them think that you are absolutely in love with them and then you tell them, I'm not going to be using your services anymore, I'm going to be using somebody else's, that might catch them off guard. And if you've got 3 or 4 invoices that you haven't paid and you just choose not to pay those invoices because maybe, whatever justification you can come up with, here's what's going to happen. That cleaner is going to go on to Facebook pages like Things to Do in the Poconos or Pocono Moms or just wherever, and they're going to make sure every other cleaner in the Poconos knows that your property is one that's being sued for theft of services and that you are the kind of property owner that's going to not pay your invoices. Hell hath no fury, right? This is a woman scorned, most likely. This is not necessarily a good thing. And remember, the Poconos is a small little pond. It's not a very deep pool. The people out here know each other, and we do a lot of collaborating where we work together. Not only that, there's a lot of chat around the bars and around the Poconos Vacation Rental Owners Association. You don't want to be on the outside of that, and you don't want to be on the bad side of that. So however you do leave your cleaner, make sure that they don't have any hard feelings towards you, because you don't want to be quote unquote blacklisted by the other cleaners in the region, because then you're only going to find a handful of cleaners who are willing to work with you, and they're going to make you pay beforehand. So there's stuff like that happens as well. Another thing to watch out for is local politics. So the Poconos is what I call the land of HOAs, and nobody likes HOAs. I don't think the people running the HOAs like HOAs. I think the people who choose an HOA are kind of doing it because of the necessary evil. So the ones who are running the HOA are usually there because of a vendetta, some sort of mission, or because of revenge, or a feeling of like a need for power. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like a lot of times you find HOAs are full of people who have good intentions, but they just have like low IQ and nothing better to do. So why do you think they have nothing better to do? It's because they're not very productive people. Anyway, so back to the point. I don't mean to trash HOAs, but the Poconos is like the land of HOAs. And to help you understand why, it's because of the time when this area was developed. A big thing in the Poconos, because of our location and our elevation, was the ice industry and logging. So in the olden days, they needed logs for firewood. They needed logs for construction. They had to be transported to places like New York City, New Jersey, places of urban development. Well, back before the interstates were put in, there wasn't an easy, fast way for people to get from the Poconos to other places. So they pretty much had some trains that were going through because of the coal region, and they would put lumber on those trains and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm getting too far into it. High level overview, right? So logging and ice industry was really popular out here. Well, the ice industry went away because of refrigeration, which happened in like the 20s, 30s, 40s, and really became common in the 60s. The interstate system got completed, I think, in the 60s or 50s. In fact, I should probably look up when Interstate 380 was put in. But nevertheless, a lot of these tracts of land were owned by these logging companies and ice industry companies, where they were building up dams and they were cutting ice and selling the ice for refrigerant. Well, now that those things aren't needed anymore, they don't need these lakes. They don't need this land. They can sell it off, but they don't want to sell it off like in individual lots. Some of them became developers and they turned them into developments, but they mostly sold them off to developers. Now, the townships didn't want anything else to handle. So they preferred, if there's going to be development here, we don't want to have to be involved. So have your own septic systems, have your own wells and stuff like that. So that's how the Poconos became the land of HOAs, is because it was so undeveloped that these townships were just like, look, we don't want to do it. So if there's development going to be done, it's going to be privatized. It's going to be a private development. And so that's what happened, and they didn't have some sort of standards that like, you've got to have a sewer system, you've got to have a public water system. Like they didn't have those things. And not only that, but the Poconos is extremely rocky. So putting in any sewer or water mains is going to be expensive too, because of the cost of excavation and trenching. So a lot of these developments were built up around these lakes. They were 1,000, 2,000 acres, and then they were split up into quarter-acre lots, half-acre lots, 1-acre lots in some situations. So the townships, though, since the 60s and 70s and 80s, what people were building up here were vacation homes. And that's primarily because air conditioning wasn't common, and it gets really hot in the city. So for people to escape the city, they would come to the Poconos because it's about 10 degrees cooler here. Also, all the trees cause your cabin to be shaded. So it's just nicer, cooler. You can go swim in a cool lake, find a stream. You can do activities, hiking, whatever. And there's a lot of natural beauty in the Pocono Mountains. So people were coming here primarily for those reasons. Now, that's why the Poconos is the land of HOAs. Getting back to my point, the local politics to watch out for is that every single HOA has its own vital signs. It's got its own personality. It's got its own quirks. You have to think about what High Country Estates is like versus Arrowhead Lakes versus Locust Lake Village versus Lake Naomi. There's all these different homeowners associations, and they all kind of have their own attitude towards you and your business. So finding one that's accepting is important. A lot of them are very accepting. So there's not really any red flags there. The smaller they get, the more volatile they can be. So before you buy out here, you just want to have an agent who understands those vital signs, who understands a kind of a profile of the community in the HOA. Because when I was a brand new agent, I was not the one to use. When I was a new agent, people were asking me, does this community have a pool? And I was looking at the listing and be like, yep, there's a pool. I didn't know. And they might have asked me like, well, does this community have a playground? And I'd be like, yep, it's listed right here. I would refer to the listing for this information. Did I know how great the playground was? Did I know how great the pool was? Did I know, what these amenities were like? And if it was a good value for the HOA fee? Absolutely not. So if you're using, I don't know, a cousin that lives in Pennsylvania and they happen to be like in the Philadelphia region and they've sold one house in the Poconos, what do you think are the chances of them being able to explain to you the pros and cons of Pocono Country Place versus Pocono Farms Country Club? And how are you going to know the difference between Pocono Farms East and Pocono Farms Country Club? Google? You could use Google. And now that they're using AI, you can get a lot of this information there. But honestly, AI is coming at it from the same amount of information as that agent from Philly that sold one house up here. It's just, I can do some research and I can synthesize that and give it back to you. What you really need is somebody who has been selling in this region, who's sold properties in every single HOA, who's actually managed properties or has been associated with the people who are managing properties in these different associations. Because then and only then are you going to actually get all that background info. Now and then, my buyers get surprised because I'll tell them about the intimate details of all the different HOA fees. And, if you buy in Pocono Country Place and you register your guest 3 days before they arrive, it's $50. But if they don't provide all of the information necessary for you to register your guest until 2 days prior, now you've got to pay an extra $75. Are you going to expect your guest to pay that extra $75 fee? If not, guess what? These things rack up over time. Now, if you go over to Pocono Farms Country Club, now it's $125 and the late fee is $75 still. So now you end up spending $200 per reservation. But then if you go over to Arrowhead, it's $8.50 per person per day, plus $20 per vehicle, plus $20. But that includes all amenities. Now, over at Pocono Farms Country Club, it includes all amenities except for golf. And over at Pocono Country Place, it doesn't include any amenities. They just get through the gate for that price. So that $125, even if it's late, they still have to pay $12 per person per day if they want passes to go to the pool and the beach. So there's all these different regulations and things that are up in a mind like this. And so it's important that you find a realtor that knows the differences in locations, because it's not like any one location is the best. It's not like you can just find your best deal just by looking solely on Locust Lake Village. I don't recommend that, because you might miss some really good opportunities in other HOAs that aren't quite as good just because the property is that much better. There's not that much inventory that you can be that choosy that you can hone in on just one little HOA and go from there. But it is important to understand the differences between these different HOAs, the atmosphere and the feeling and the way the board of directors has been acting towards vacation rentals and things like that. So other things with local politics are like townships. So Tobyhanna Township has been very dramatic in the last couple of years. They passed their STR ordinance and then they changed it and they changed it again and they changed it again. And now I think we found some sort of space where they're going to probably stay. And it seems to be much more reasonable. But then you've still got other things in local politics going on, like who's on the board of supervisors and why they're rezoning this one area so that now a resort can come in, or they're going to be changing that to a data center. And all these different types of things are going on. And you don't want to be buying your house, backing up to this humongous, beautiful forest, and then find out later on after closing that there's a data center being built back there and your trees are going to be clear cut, because that's going to impact your value. It's going to impact your guests. perceived value of the property and their experience to not have woods, because that was part of the selling point of buying that house in that location. And your agent from Philly isn't going to know this. They would be better off, because they're your cousin, getting a referral fee. So that's what happens in real estate. So an agent will share 25% of the commission with the referring agent in order to get that referral. So just, if you want to do your cousin a favor, tell them, look, can you refer me to an agent in this region that knows what they're doing? Because at the end of the day, I want that great agent. I also want to throw you a favor, but I don't want to trust you to be the expert in anything outside of Philly, because that's where you're an expert. So about this whole like team effort thing, talking about contractors and cleaners and the local politics, just make sure that you approach your rental business like you just got your first command. You need to recruit great soldiers and keep morale high. Between the contractors that you're improving these properties with, the cleaners that you're using to clean it each time, and the dynamics of the battlefield, meaning like your HOA and your township, you want to make sure that you continually recruit great soldiers. And that's the contractors, that's the cleaners. And then you keep morale high so that they don't quit on you, because sometimes people burn bridges too fast. And just make sure that you're not the one leading the match. So another part of your email question has to do with your friend who is apparently gloating about how successful they are in real estate. But remember that success in real estate is about the net income, not the gross. And you know what is gross, right? That's like how much you're making. That's all the revenue that comes in. And that's what we use when we talk and compare about, different rentals. But net is once you drop the gross through a net, that's what you have left over at the end. Right? So what actually stays in your bank account? It's not just the income that comes into it, but then you use that account to pay everything off. And I want to say, based on my experience, maybe 80% of investors never do the finances of their rentals correctly. Now, you already mentioned that you've got a long-term rental near Fort Liberty in North Carolina. So there's some expenses that come along with being a landlord. And then there's other expenses that come along with being a short-term rental property owner. So like focusing on net versus focusing on gross is, I think, a real key to figuring out if your business is doing well or if it's doing poorly. Like this is more important than cholesterol. This is like your heartbeat. If it stops, there's a problem, right? So to bring this into soldier terms, what's the point of advancing 10 clicks if you're just going to be pushed back another 10? You're right back where you started and you're feeling defeated. If your property earns $120,000 a year, wow, put it on Instagram, gloat, tell your friends that you've succeeded. But if it costs you $120,000 for that year, then you've just wasted your time, or you've invested it because maybe next year it'll clear 60. Like you've got to have all these different types of things in perspective, right? Jason, what I'm getting at is that you can't just set it and forget it. You can't just make this thing work or underwrite it and then set it up and then expect your team to just handle everything after that. You still got to look at your numbers. You still got to look at your success, and you still got to figure out and pivot. You need to know how your property is doing throughout the year. And a lot of property owners don't actually look at their figures, but you've got to track your utilities, your expenses for maintenance, which are high in September and really low for the rest of the year. That averages out. You got to come up with an average number. You've got to have a budget. You got to project forward. This is what I think we're going to make in November. This is what I think we're going to make in December. Because if you don't project forward at least 6 months, you're not going to know when you can make an owner withdrawal from your checking account. And yes, you should have a checking account just for this property that you are, using in order to continue running the property. And whatever you expect your initial investment into this place to be, plus 6 months of operating costs, that's what you should be investing up front. So if you are liquidating the equity in your house in North Carolina and you're going to have $120,000, well, that's your total budget. Factor in a few months of operating expenses, because your first few months, you're not going to really make anything anyway. Your guests are going to cover your registration fees, your cleaning fees, and barely anything else. But that's, again, something that we do in order to gain traction for the future, right? So they can move at a faster pace later on. So compared to long-term rentals, there's a ton more expenses that you have to consider, because you don't have a long-term renter who's paying your electric bill. So you have to underwrite your electric bill. And the utilities in this region might be a little bit different than they are in North Carolina, right? In North Carolina, you're probably paying a lot more on AC in the summertime, where up here, not nearly as much. However, our electricity bills are super high in the winter Because remember when this whole area was developed in the 60s and 70s and 80s, the cheapest way to build these houses was to put electric baseboard heat in them. And because a lot of people weren't using them in the winter anyway, they would just winterize their house and they'd leave their heat off. So the cheap heater was better than the more expensive heating system just because it wasn't going to get used year round. Well, now it is. Now it is being used year round. So you have to think about, well, what's my electricity bill going to be? What is my heating source? And what should I underwrite for this? Because in long-term rental situation, your renters are paying you those utilities. Out here, you've got to think about those. And it's not just electricity. Sometimes it's also gas. Sometimes you got to take care of trash. If you're not in an HOA, then you've got to figure out who's going to collect my trash, right? And that could be $50 a month if it's picked up at the curb. But then there's other things to consider. So check out my podcast on bears, what to do about those, because that is, that factors into what you're going to do about trash. You've also got to figure out the registration fees. I know you are probably expecting registration fees if you're in an HOA, but you have to think through, like, how am I going to price this in? Like, how am I going to make sure that there's funds for this? And how is this going to affect my net? But you have to factor those registration fees in, because if you are looking at a property that's making, I don't know, let's take 403 Antler Lane in Tobyhanna for an example. That property used to earn $90,000, but the average stay was 1.6 nights. So that means most of the reservations were one night stays. So the cleaning service that's charging $160 per turn is doing 102 turns per year. They're making $16,000 to $17,000 for cleaning. And that's out of the $90,000 gross. So yeah, you can be like, hey, I made $90,000 on a $300,000 investment property. But after the cleaner gets their income, then you've got, your HOA. Now that's $125 if all the registrations are on time. But when it's one night stays, a lot of them are going to be late. Because why do they need to be registered? The guest isn't going to care about access to amenities. They're just coming to your house for the day. So they end up coming late oftentimes, and you end up making extra money. And that part is, pretty sweet. But here's the catch, is that now you've got 102 turns and you've got $125 to $200 per turn. So the HOA gets another $12,000 to $15,000. And that's on top of the $16,000 that's going to your cleaners. So you're already out like roughly 30 grand just because of those two fixed costs. So what you're left with is now $60,000, but you've got a mortgage, you've got utilities, you've got taxes, and you've got other issues like that. So there's a lot of things to factor in here. Now, if you actually end up purchasing a property like in Pocono Township, it's $2,500 a year to renew your short-term rental permit. If you buy in Jackson Township, it's $800 per year. So you have to factor things like this in because it does affect your net. And then Jason, the third thing that I really want to make sure that I communicate to you in response to this email is that the Poconos has actually changed a lot since the last time you were here. There's nothing that's stuck in the 80s that's getting booked today. Those properties that are like you were describing that are paneling everywhere, old furniture, those properties are just sitting vacant. Most of the time, they're just somebody's vacation home. And the reason they're on Airbnb is just so they can bring an extra like $800 a month. It's just to help cover the expenses, the HOA fees, or whatever else. A lot of those houses are being rented without linens, and they're just kind of bottom of the barrel. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of the 80-20 rule, right? Where 20% of the houses are doing 80% of the income. That's still true. Like, it's almost surprising. You would wonder why everybody just doesn't run their property the same way in order to be successful, but they don't all have that same motivation. They don't all have that desire to be successful. So you were asking earlier, like, is it really going to be that easy to compete? And actually, yeah, it's very easy to compete against that 80%. But in order to really make money out here, you got to compete about that 20%. So your friend who's boasting about his property that, painted everything white and put in Wayfair furniture and everything else, like that's who your competition is. It's that guy. It's not like the houses that they used to sleep in because they're not getting any clicks. They're not getting any reservations anyway. The bar has been raised. The average house in the Poconos is decorated really nicely. And they're not just using Wayfair furniture, although that's not necessarily a problem, but like they're decorating with a theme. They're putting things in their houses like murals. They're making it attractive to guests. They're getting really good quality photography done, and they're marketing these properties effectively. That's your competition. So it might be easy to you. It's definitely nothing compared to battle. But like running and operating a short-term rental, is not something that you can succeed on based on your own merits. This is something that you have to have a team for. It's something that you have to have a good cleaner. You have to go to have a good contractor. You have to be able to get there in a pinch if you need to. For you to be successful, it's about having that vision, having that dream, and then pushing it forward and making it a reality. So, lastly, be careful who you hire as your realtor. They only get paid if you buy something. So, as soon as you start liking something, they might just inflate the projected revenue numbers to cause you to make a purchase. But I've seen the same house under one owner make $90,000, while under another owner, it only makes $36,000. Those are both gross. Imagine what the net is. It takes a good, experienced eye to accurately predict which property will be successful with your plan. And you need someone who's going to tell you that your plan is terrible if it actually is. And 99 out of 100 realtors won't, but I will. That's because this is the show where we discuss the challenges that no one talks about when they sell the dream of easy passive income. Left unaddressed, they're exactly the problems that will make or break your operation. If you're a property manager, an owner-operator, a co-host, or just an investor, I'd love to help. Have you got questions? Then please email me at info@galvanizedmanagement.com. Your problem might be the next one that we break down, and chances are you'll help a lot of other hosts in the process too. We win or we lose together. If this episode helped you, great. Share it with other people who are in the trenches. Rate and subscribe too, so we can organically reach more people. That's how we make this industry better. I'd also love to see you follow us on TikTok at Galvanized Investments and Facebook and YouTube at Galvanized Management. Until next time, stay steady, keep learning, and keep building something real. This is Short-Term Rental Problems and Solutions.